Hello, everybody. Scott Golden, Golden Opportunities Coaching here, and it's been a minute since I've had the chance to record audio for you. I've had busy things due to other parts of business over the past few weeks, but hopefully going to get back to daily uploads here starting today. That's my goal anyway. Like, subscribe, comment. I'm excited because we're almost to 250 subscribers. We're at 235 right now. Would really appreciate your help in reaching that 250 goal. Then we'll set a 500 goal, then we'll set a 750 and then 1,000. When we get to 1,000, that means we're at one of the two metrics for the benefit of being able to monetize and give some money to charity. So that is really meaningful to me because I want to be able to help with the work we do here in a charitable way. Anyway, today's audio, we're going to talk about some things that can make a person turn to a darker side, to bring out the darker side of the self, traumas that can actually make a person change their mindset, but also their viewpoint on the world into a darker, some would say evil way of being. And so there's about 6 or 7 different things I want to cover here in this audio. So one thing that I think is understated, and especially having worked with about 15,000 people in 40 countries, a traumatic experience can completely change a person forever. Having had 2 very abusive parents and knowing that they both went through trauma, both of them before the age of, before the age of 25, certainly, and neither one of them fully, completely recovered. I'm a huge proponent of trauma recovery being something done within the first, preferably 48 hours after a traumatic experience, but certainly, definitely within the first 14 days of a traumatic experience. And that can mean going into a counselor, that can mean going into isolation with somebody around the clock for a while. I'm a huge proponent of the setting up psychologically of trauma centers, where people who have had a traumatic experience, they've been in a car accident, they've been physically or sexually assaulted, they've seen a murder or other violent crime, they have been threatened where they had reason to fear for their life. These type of traumas, I am a huge proponent of removing people from society at their own request for up to, I would say, 2 years, and helping them to remap their brain. Now, is this financially feasible? That's an argument for politics, and I won't go there, but I will say this. If it were financially feasible to do this, I firmly believe we would see a reduction in narcissistic tendency behavior. I believe we would see a reduction in crime. I believe we would see a reduction in infidelity and many other unhealthy and abusive behaviors, because it is my belief, after working with so many people and working with how their brain works through trauma, that once a person's brain has settled into a post-traumatic experience mindset, it is anywhere from 3 to 10 times harder for them to recover than when their brain is still flexible after trauma. And that flexibility certainly is within the first year. And the closer you get to the event, the more easy it is to help a person reset their brain. That being said, not everybody wants that treatment. Not everybody believes that treatment will work for them. But also, most people who have gone through something traumatic often believe that they're beyond repair, because the fight or flight syndrome, especially if a person stays, think like a TV remote with a stuck button. If a stuck button stays stuck for too long, it might have difficulty popping back up. The human brain is much the same. If a person stays in a traumatic thought pattern for too long, it has problems with resiliency. And so a person who was once really, really generous and kind and loving, one trauma can turn them into someone who we would see as dark or permanently warped or even psychotic because of how their brain responded to that trauma. The second one is poverty. So a person who grows up in poverty, it has been proven, and there are studies, I wish I had links to them, Um, when I get a research assistant, I'm going to start posting links. That's probably going to be 6 months to a year off. But when I get a research assistant, I'm going to start posting links to this stuff. But one thing that I will say is there's tons of research about the link between poverty and emotional resilience, and poverty and self-belief, and poverty and self-esteem, and poverty and addiction, and poverty and so many other undesirable human conditions. And the thing is if a person is always in lack for their basic needs, their brain forms to be in fight or flight syndrome nearly all the time. So even when things start to go well, and I have many clients who, they'll start to get, I'm working with a few people now who grew up in what we would consider, quote, ghetto, quote, situations, who feel guilty for leaving behind their friends, their family, their neighborhoods, but also they almost are in shock that they have an opportunity to leave that lifestyle behind, that lifestyle of poverty, that lifestyle of hardship, that lifestyle of violence. And there's actual guilt and shame for many of them. I'd say over the years, probably 60% of people that I've worked with that were raised in poverty or came up in poverty before the age of 21, 60% of those people who do make it good go through somewhere between 3 months and 2 years worth of guilt that they're making good in life, that they are, kind of like, hey, I'm going to leave this behind. Hey, I don't have to worry about living on ramen noodles. Hey, I don't have to worry about choosing between buying my medication and my heat bill. These are real problems for people, and I think it's understated within our society. And then if you break in racism and racial segregation, neighborhood segregation, that there's a belief that certain neighborhoods can't get into good schools, and school districts segregate, and there's a whole bunch of other things. But poverty can turn a person who has a lot of hope into a person that has lost all hope, and it's more common than people think. Obviously, I mentioned addiction earlier, but the likelihood that a person's brain chemistry will change due to use of illicit drugs or pharmaceutical drugs, or illegal drugs, obviously, over a period of time longer than 6 months, continued use is somewhere between 30 and 70%, depending upon the substance or combination of substance used. Now, there are people who are lucky and they can use a drug and use it for an extended period of time and go back to being the person they were before when getting clean. This is most common with alcohol and prescription drugs, less common with things like methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, just because the changes in the brain for those more street drugs and the combination of chemicals used to create them are more likely to change the brain in a short span of time. However, I have dealt with, talked to, and been friends with people who have recovered, although the recovery rate for the brain does decrease when using illicit drugs, and it also decreases based on length of use. So obviously addiction can cause a person's brain to change. Their impulse control receptors can be damaged. Their pleasure sensors can be damaged. Their ability to feel any emotion can be damaged. Also, the part of the brain that deals with things like actions and consequences can be negatively affected. Cognitive reasoning ability can be negatively affected. All of this depends, obviously, on the body chemistry, brain chemistry, length of use, and a whole bunch of other factors. But suffice to say, addiction can and often does contribute to permanent brain changes that can change the disposition of an individual. It's unfortunate because I've literally seen in my own personal life with friends at least 3 separate cases. One, two with illicit drug combination, but one with pharmaceutical drugs that they were prescribed, where they permanently changed and were not able to recover. And it's a horrible thing to watch, extremely painful, and kind of maddening because you don't know how to help them, and oftentimes there's little, if anything, that can be done to help them. Another one Obviously, this goes without saying, any form of abuse, but abuse links to trauma. So it's kind of like it's a dual comorbid situation. The abuse causes trauma, and the trauma is caused by the abuse. So these two things go hand in hand. When a person doesn't feel safe, when a person doesn't feel secure, when a person doesn't feel wanted, needed, loved, or in any way valued, and they feel that their physical safety, their emotional or mental safety, their sexual safety, any of these things are in danger. And this can be anything from prolonged cases of this. So we're talking about child abuse or relational abuse, but also it can be something as simple as a single situation like a sexual assault, a rape, a physical assault, these type of things. Any sort of abuse where a person's personal space is violated can change a person. And a lot of that has to do with the meaning that they place around that situation. This is why individuals who have been in relationships with narcissists, relationships with people with Machiavellian disorder or borderline personality disorder, often find it extremely difficult to get into healthy relationships or trust the relationship they're in, because the trauma they keep reliving is the what if they wind up in the exact same situation. And a lot of times that happens in the unconscious or subconscious mind, so the person can be enjoying the time they spend with a potential partner. They enjoy that person greatly, but then they ultimately go back to that default sense of need for self-protection because of the abuse they've suffered, and it can change how they relate to people, sometimes permanently, if they don't get some form of outside perspective and treatment. The next one is brainwashing, conditioning from any number of things. This can be an abusive family situation. This can be a partner who engages in cutting one off from other sources of communication. So using isolation techniques. This can happen because of political ideology, and a person isolates from any other viewpoints. This can happen because of religious ideology, and a person isolates from any other viewpoint. If a person has been brainwashed in a cultic situation, be it religious, political, or otherwise, oftentimes their ability to relate with the rest of the world is long-term, if not permanently damaged. As a person who grew up in various, easiest way to relate it would be religious extremism. I don't know that cult would be the proper word, although I personally use it. Other people may not. I know that my sense of belief in humanity had to be relearned and taught, because when your power to believe is challenged, be it by a person of authority, a person of religious authority, or just even a partner, relearning how to think independently and think critically can be a laborious and often overwhelming experience. The last one is the opposite of the power of being poor, the power of being rich. The power of being rich, or entitled as it were, can shape how a person sees the world in a really dark way. In other words, the separatism that comes between, let's say, the top 1% or 5% of society and the rest of the world is something like, this person doesn't try. They have no interest in trying. They don't deserve opportunity. So what happens is those with the most power look down on those that need the most help, and then we have class separation as a result of that. Now, if we had, let's say, billionaires, because they are obviously the most powerful, although Jeff Bezos, from what I read a few months ago, is going to become the world's first trillionaire, which is just incredibly powerful and scary at the same time. But anyway, the idea that money creates separatism and the illusion of competition, which is one of the, from a spiritual perspective, the idea of competition is not created by the higher power of creation. It's created by human conception. And so when we idealize competing over money or fame or power or visual appearance or knowledge and not realizing we can gain knowledge, we create separation amongst groups of people. And the problem with separation, especially by money, is that it segregates a group of the population, especially the lowest possible group, into having no long-term value unless they get really, 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 really lottery level lucky, which then creates anger, frustration, the gateway to mental illness, the gateway to violence, and a whole bunch of other things. The more we as a human race, as a species, and as all of mankind focus on separatism, the more we will get what we don't want, which is the result of separatism, like violence and hatred and division and all these other things. Now, that may sound very, woo-woo or spiritual to the non-spiritual, but the fact remains, even for an atheist or an agnostic, you can apply the principle that if we focus on what separates people, they are more likely to be defensive, and they're going to defend what they feel they have to defend because they're separate or different. And that's just a basic human psychology principle, and having nothing to do with religion or spirituality. And so that's an important factor too. Anyway, that will close us off for this audio. It is my goal. I have literally 50 plus audios that need to be recorded. It's my goal to get a good number of those up as quickly as I can. Hopefully some tonight after I do some work on another project. But in any event, until next time, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.